Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be continuing my 13 days of Halloween series with the Fall of the House of Usher. Now this is going to be the final series produced by Mike Flanagan for Netflix, and if you know me and my taste in horror, you know that Mike Flanagan is easily my favorite horror filmmaker of all time. I love every single thing that he's ever made, from all his movies to all his shows, especially from Hill House to Bly Manor to Midnight Mass, which I absolutely love, and The Midnight Club. I love everything that he's ever done, and the Fall of the House of Usher feels like a nice culmination of everything that he has done up until this point, featuring actors from his very first feature film all the way up to his latest Netflix show. So I was very excited for this show, and I'm even more excited to talk about spoilers for everything that happens in this series. So if you have not seen The Fall of the House of Usher, all 8 episodes in this miniseries are now out on Netflix. You can go ahead and binge them all like I did and come back and we can talk about all the juicy details that is throughout this entire series, which has just a phenomenal ending that I just cannot wait to talk about. So what is The Fall of the House of Usher about? Well, essentially it follows Madeline and Roderick Usher, who started Fortunato Pharmaceuticals, which essentially built up their family in this empire of power and money and greed and all this stuff that builds up to this empire that they essentially built for their family, until it all starts crumbling down one at a time when each member of their family begins to be killed off. And of course, this is a horror series on Netflix, so you're going to have a lot of ghosts, you're going to have a lot of jump scares, you're going to have a lot of creepy moments, but it's also a Mike Flanagan series, so you're going to have a lot of deep introspective looks into these characters with the amazing cast that this film has. And what makes this kind of stand out amongst the rest of his shows on Netflix is the fact that the cast members are all playing against type this time around. They're all playing the villains of the show because the Usher family are all despicable. I hate every single one of them, except for maybe one or two of them are good people. The rest of them are absolutely just awful, and they get exactly what they deserve, which makes the story that is told through this series extremely satisfying by the end of it. This story is also told through a series of flashbacks. So you have the main present-day storyline, which shows Bruce Greenwood telling the story of the fall of the House of Usher to Carla Lumley's character, who is essentially this investigator that's been trying to take down this Usher crime family for so many years because of his own personal stakes in the situation. And so he is essentially being told the story, which is when we get a flashback to Roderick and Madeline's rise throughout Fortunato Pharmaceuticals. You also get to see this very key moment in their lives of this New Year's Eve going from 1979 to 1980, which is not really covered or really explored until the final episode of the series. And you also get the chronological story from the past 2 weeks of the death of every single kid, which kind of plays out in those 6 episodes where you get to see one of them die. And I think if I were to have any sort of flaw with this series in general, it's that you kind of pick up on the structure of this show pretty much right away. After the second or third episode, you're going to essentially figure out that every episode is going to feature, Bruce Greenwood seeing a ghost of one of his children who has died, and you get to see their mangled body and kind of get hinted at how they're going to die, and the episode's going to lead up until their death, and they're going to move on to the next episode. And I think in some ways, depending on how telegraphed those deaths are going to be, it can lack some surprise, but it's not necessarily about the destination in these episodes. It's more about the journey of how we got there and how we are exploring these characters. But I think that can take away some of the tension and some of the weight to some of these episodes, but some of them are very effective in how it tells that story and can still pull a lot of surprises out, especially in the back half of this season. The first of the 6 children to die is Perry Usher. He is played by one of the actors from The Midnight Club, of course, Flanagan, bringing together his cast from all his previous work. But this is a character that dies in a very interesting way as compared to everybody else in this series. And as I kind of explain all these different characters, you can see that greed is kind of their main sin that they commit throughout the entirety of this show. I think that greed is very much, I guess, the main theme of this show, and how everybody is obsessed with money, and how it is essentially like they are a drug company. They're making this drug that is highly addictive, that is a painkiller, or supposedly supposed to be a painkiller, but has kind of caused all this pain to a lot of people throughout the world. And these characters are essentially using money as their own painkillers to get through their lives, and they can't live without this greed, without this money, and it's going to lead to their eventual downfall by the end of it. And so with all the children of Roderick Usher, they essentially kind of went down their own path to create their own companies, and once they pitch an idea good enough, they're eventually going to get a loan from Roderick Usher of millions of dollars so they can start up their own thing. And so that's essentially what this character is trying to do. He's trying to set up this idea of this crazy party that's extremely exclusive, that's going to be this rave that's going to be going on, that's going to essentially turn into this orgy, and he has this whole idea of how he's going to do all of this. And of course, him being a scumbag like everybody else in his family, he's going to set up some secret cameras, catch these famous and rich people in acts that they don't want to be caught in, and use it as blackmail against them, including Morella Usher, who is the wife of Henry Thomas's character Frederick Usher. This is also where we get to see what Carla Gugino's role is throughout this entire series, who is essentially the one who is leading all these characters to their eventual demise, kind of testing them in a sort of way to see if they will make a good decision in the end of their lives. Not that making a good decision at this point in their lives is going to save them in any sort of way. They're all doomed to die, but she's essentially giving them one final test to see if they will make the wrong decision, and them being the Usher family being absolutely despicable, they're going to make the wrong decision, which is going to show their characters and kind of why they deserve this downfall that they're getting to them. And this kid's downfall is the fact that he is greedy. His sin is lust, that he's going to go after all these different things, and he's going to try to throw this rave, and he's not going to leave when he should leave. He's not going to stop this thing when it needs to stop, and he's going to rain down acid on all these family members, or not all these family members, but all these party goers that are in this like mansion type thing in a very gruesome manner. This is probably the most gruesome and graphic death throughout the entire series that is only in episode 2, but it was absolutely brutal, and the poor wife of Henry Thomas's character did not deserve what she gets in this episode whatsoever. Yes, she did decide to go off with Perry to go to this party to essentially try to cheat on Henry Thomas's character, and so I guess she kind of deserves it, but it was so brutal with what happens to her, and how Henry Thomas treats her after this point was absolutely despicable. The next member of the family to go is Camille Usher, played by Kate Siegel, and it's very sad to see Kate Siegel go in episode 3 of this show. I just love seeing her in every single one of these Mike Flanagan shows or movies or whatever it's going to be, and she's always great in all of them, and her playing a villain this time around was really great because she is also extremely despicable in this series. She's essentially the PR person of this family, that whenever somebody did something bad in the family, she can spin the PR to kind of make themselves look better than they actually are, and she will lie and cheat her way through any situation. She can talk herself out of any situation as well, and she was very smart in that way. She also had, the sins of lust and greed that everybody else had in this family, and that when Carl Lumbly's character was, prosecuting them in this court case, and he said that there's a mole in the family that was essentially a whistleblower, she's going to try to figure out who this whistleblower was, even though this was all a bluff on the side of Carl Lumbly's character, trying to cheat his way into making this house kind of crumble on the inside. And so she's going around to try to sneak around to see which character could possibly be the mole, and she gets herself into one of the other siblings, played by Tania Miller, who's developing this hearts technology that can help people live longer, and they're kind of abusing these apes and killing all these animals to try to make this medication work, even though it's killing them. And she's trying to push through and get this approved, even though it is still not ready for human trials. And so there's that whole other storyline with her, which we'll get into in a second here, but she goes to the facility, to all these apes, and is taking pictures of how they're being treated to try to blackmail her own stepsister apparently, and she gets mauled by one of these apes. And again, she gets to see Carla Gugino playing this role of guiding her down this path and saying that she has failed her test essentially, and that she gets attacked by this ape in this moment, in a very brutal death as well. And this is where I guess kind of the structure of the series becomes very obvious of how we're just going to get a death of the family and that title card smash at the end of each episode, and we're going to kind of keep on moving on. And not that this episode wasn't as good as the other ones, I think that each of these episodes are pretty decent to begin with, and I think the way that these characters kind of maneuver throughout all their decisions, and once they get to the place where they're going to die, they really do deserve it at that point in time. And so you're essentially put in this structure that we're going to get a little bit tired of, but either way, you still get a good character study of this character who went down this path of trying to blackmail the rest of her family to try to figure out who the liar is, and she really has no empathy for them whatsoever. The next one to go is sadly Rahul Kohli's character, who I absolutely love him in everything that he is in when it comes to Flanagan stuff, especially Midnight Mass. But if you haven't seen him and Bruce Green from Rooster Teeth reenact all of these Star Wars prequels from memory on like these old streams that they did on YouTube or Twitch or whatever it was, go check those out because they are really, really funny. But he was great in this show, as well as this kind of narcissistic character that is hopped up on all these drugs. He doesn't really care about the world around him or the family around him. And, of all these characters, I think he was the one that was willing to kind of quit and leave everything behind very easily. So I don't think he was necessarily a terrible person. But when his partner's cat died and it was like stabbed with a knife, and he decided to hide this cat's body, clean up the mess, and get him a new cat, like that's a pretty messed up thing to do. He wasn't really an honest person, and he never worked a day in his life either. He would say that he is a video game developer, which he was not. He would just give the money to an actual video game developer to do all the work, and he would take credit for it, just as everyone else in this family has always done. He didn't ever work a day in his life. He just kind of took this success and ran with it and never really had a care in the world. He never really cared fully about his family. And when his partner's cat is found dead with a knife stabbing it, and he doesn't know what happened because he was so hopped up on drugs, he decides to hide the body, clean up the mess and get him a new cat. So he's clearly not a good guy either. I think that this episode shows that this show can have its fun moments. I do think there's some genuinely funny moments in this series as well, especially when it pertains to his character, when he's all hopped up on drugs and he thinks this cat is evil, which this cat technically is evil because Carla Gugino's character really just messing with him to try to drive him mad, try to make him make all these poor decisions. And he's essentially running around his apartment with this Thor hammer smashing the walls, and it is extremely funny. I loved all of this stuff. And he essentially throws himself out the window at one point, splattering down on the ground. And I didn't really mention that, in the scenes with Bruce Greenwood telling this story to Carl Lumbly's character, you get to see all the ghosts kind of pop up to him every once in a while. And there's a great jump scare of the body kind of falling directly in between these two characters, interrupting the conversation that they're having. And Carl Lumbly's character keeps on thinking that Bruce Greenwood is absolutely insane and is losing it, but he's really just seeing the death of his children right in front of his eyes, and he's trying to tell these stories in the most honest and respectful way that he can, because he's essentially confessing to all the terrible things that he has done in his life, and these children that are essentially paying the consequences of this guy's mistakes, essentially trying to make sure that their story is told correctly, which I think is a good way to frame the story. But now we can get into Tania Miller's character as Victorine, and this one is probably one of the more disturbing aspects of this entire show. And I love Tania Miller from Bly Manor. I think she was phenomenal in that show, and her ending in that show is very tragic, but here she really did deserve what she got coming for her. And like I said, she is a doctor developing this technology that will help keep the heart beating in some sort of crisis with the heart, and so she wants to move on to human trials. It's very much not ready. It's killing all the apes that they try to install it on, and she's very much pushing for this technology to be pushed through to human trials, despite it being ready to make her look better in the eyes of her father, in the eyes of the family, to get them more money. Again, greed being a big aspect of this. But as the story goes on, you see that she becomes more mad and more mad throughout the entire episode. Carla Gugino is, of course, going to be the one that is offered to be the first human trial, and so she's still pushing for this to happen. And they get to the point where she starts hearing this weird cranking sound that kind of sounds like a heartbeat but doesn't feel like an actual heartbeat. It's more mechanical, and it's kind of building up throughout the entire episode of seeing her slowly going mad, which is also very reminiscent of what happens to her character in Bly Manor as well, of noticing these things happening in the background that shouldn't be there, and you find out a really big twist by the end of the episode. And I love the fact that the father goes over to try to apologize to her, essentially to try to make up for some of the pressure that he has added to her, and she's like, oh no, this pressure is fine, we're going to move on to human trials, we're going to actually be successful at this. And then he goes into this room, he hears the noise, and he sees her partner is dead with her stomach essentially torn open, and this device is attached to her dead heart still trying to beat. It is very disturbing. And then Victorine takes a knife to herself, and that is how she dies in this episode. This was definitely I think it was the most disturbing episode of this entire series. I just thought that reveal of that being that sound that you've been hearing throughout the entire episode, and she just kind of forgot that had happened. She suppressed that memory in the back of her mind when she was wondering why her partner wasn't responding to her calls, and when it's finally revealed that is what went down, it is truly just messed up. And honestly, I love it. But now we get to Samantha Sloyan's character, and I absolutely hated her in Midnight Mass. She was despicable in that show, and honestly, she was not nearly as despicable in this show as she was in that one, but that's just more of a testament to how terrible she was in Midnight Mass. A great actress, but just I hated her. And here, she is also a terrible person because she is one of the Usher children, and she does this weird thing where she hires this prostitute to come in and essentially roleplay as her, and she can kind of watch her and her husband eat dinner and start with a normal conversation, and eventually move to the bedroom, and she would just kind of sit there and watch everything go down, which is a weird controlling thing that she has with her sort of character that is just really uncomfortable and cringy. And then it also gets to this product that she's making that is not Goop, but it's essentially making fun of Goop. And so she has all these weird things in her life, and it's leading up to possibly be successful, but she's slowly going mad throughout this entire episode as well. And she freaks out on stage, and that scene was extremely hard to watch with just how cringy and awkward and just awful it was. And there's also this character played by Ruth Codd who is married to Bruce Greenwood's character, which is just absolutely disgusting. But the way that all the children kind of treat her as their essentially stepmother is really funny to me. I don't know, I found all those sequences very funny, but I don't think she deserved getting a chair thrown at her head in this episode, which was also just very brutal and messed up. But the shot that it happens in was also very funny, and so there's some lighthearted moments in this episode as well, with it being a slowly her being driven into madness, thinking that's her husband is being followed and being obsessed with, Carla Gugino's character, who is, one of the prostitutes that she hired to come on in. And so again, this character is leading them to their eventual demise. And when she gets home, she's seeing all these things in the mirrors and she's trying to smash all the mirrors. And I love how this entire finale of this episode is shot. And once she finally gets onto the bed, she breaks the mirror. There's glass all over the bed, and there's a mirror above the bed as well. She jumps up, she smashes it, and it's slow motion as she slowly falls onto the glass that's now sticking up on the bed, and the glass above her coming down on top of her. And that was just such a brutal and creative death in this show that I found very satisfying as well. But of course, we didn't forget about Henry Thomas in this show, and I love the fact that he lasted this long, because we got to see him slowly go into madness throughout the very beginning of the show, with the whole thing happening with Perry and his wife going to that party and her essentially losing all of her skin.
Wait, hold it. I mean, am I ready to get my skin peeled off?
Yeah, am I ready to violently rip myself from every thread of time and space?
I'd rather have that.
What, you'd rather be atomically disassembled and never reassembled
than
again?
to have your skin ripped off?
Yes, then at least you get to live.
Live? What's the quality of life with no skin?
And him kind of accusing her of cheating and can't get into this phone, and he slowly gets mad out of jealousy, even though, like, he can't have a conversation with her. He's slowly poisoning her and paralyzing her and keeping her sick and won't let her heal in any sort of way. It reminded me a lot of Oculus and how the dad in that movie kind of tortured his wife in that sort of way as he was slowly taken over by the darker instincts in his mind. And this guy was absolutely despicable. I love Henry Thomas, but this character legitimately made my skin crawl. He was despicable to a point where he took pliers and took out all her teeth, even though her skin was already melted off and she was in this hospital bed and she was being paralyzed to not be able to speak, and her daughter was desperately trying to get her help. And it was absolutely heartbreaking. And I love the fact that when he gets to his end and he's trying to demolish the building that Perry died in, and he takes a piss on the floor because he has to establish his dominance over this place before it gets torn down. And of course, Carla Gugino's character shows up and actually acts more directly in his demise, which she hasn't done up until this point. And I love the fact that she does that, because this character is essentially a harbinger of death for all these characters, and she kind of allows it all to happen in a very natural and organic way to make it look like an accident. But she also hated this guy so much that she had to step in and kind of do it herself. And man, was this death absolutely brutal, because he's in the building as it's being demolished, and there's this chain with this sharp piece of metal swinging back and forth. And already earlier in the episode with Bruce Greenwood seeing him as a young boy slowly get torn in half in a very gruesome manner, that was really disturbing. But then you get to see how he gets torn in half in this chain swinging around with that metal, and it slowly digs deeper into his stomach. It's not like one little slash that you kind of expect from a character being cut in half, but no, it's a very slow and gruesome process. And that was brutal. It was very cold, but even more deservedly so because of how he essentially tortured his wife throughout the past 7 episodes of this show. That was just extremely hard to watch, and very, very disturbed, but also extremely satisfying to see him go in this way. But there we have it. The 6 Usher children are now dead. We've kind of looped all the way back to the very first episode with where that one started off, but we still have a few loose ends to cover. We have Kyliegh Curran's character from Dr. Sleep, who I'll get into her story in a second here, because she is still a member of the Usher family, is still a part of that bloodline, even though she was a genuinely good person that tried to help her mom, which that entire storyline is so tragic. Get into it in a second, but we still have Madeline and Roderick Usher and their comeuppance that they need to get. We also have the mystery of why Verna's character is doing all these things to this family, why this whole thing is fated for them to fall and to all eventually die in horrible deaths by the end of this series. But of course, I did skip over one character that I absolutely loved in the show, and that is Mark Hamill's character as Arthur Pym. I love the fact that Mark Hamill gets to play a real, dark and twisted and messed up character in this show. He's a great voice actor, but he really gets to play a character that has a very unique voice and a very unique stature and has this very mysterious vibe to him. And he's this killer that has all this backstory that is very much shrouded in mystery, and he feels like a legend in his own rights, and he very much stands above the Usher family as a means to get anything done that they could possibly ever need. And this guy and the way they built him up was so fascinating, and his conversations with Verna by the end of the show, with how he kind of just accepts his own fate. He's not going to make a deal with the devil because he already essentially sold his soul long ago, and he doesn't have anybody in his life to make connections for, so he has nothing to offer up Verna. And this character was just fascinating. I just loved Mark Hamill throughout every single episode he was featured in this entire show, and honestly, I think it was great. I also think his downfall by the end of the show was also deserved. He just kind of went to jail. He was held accountable for all the terrible things that he'd done on behalf of this family, and he stood by his ground and never wavered from what he was. And that was just a really strong character to kind of be throughout this entire series. But let's get into Madeline and Roderick Usher, the deal they made with Verna, and of course August Dupine. Absolutely loved all the flashbacks of Madeline and Roderick Usher rising through the ranks of this pharmaceutical company, and how they were working at first with August Dupine as like this investigator that's trying to take down this pharmaceutical company for forging these documents and testing on people without their knowledge or their consent with these drugs. That is just a very messed up situation, and you obviously know that this family ends up taking a turn down cruelty and ending up like at the top of this pharmaceutical chain, and then kind of controlling everything about this, and having Carl Lumbly's character as an older person kind of going after them in a very vengeful way. And so things are going to go bad, but you don't get to see things go bad until one of the final episodes of this series. And when there is that turn, and you have Zach Gilford playing the younger Roderick in this series make that statement to the courts, essentially blaming him for harassing this family to try to, say that this company is doing all these bad things behind the scenes, it was truly heartbreaking from a character standpoint, because I think of all the performances in this entire series, I really liked the performances of this flashback sequence. Zach Gilford and Willa Fitzgerald do a great job playing the young Roderick and Madeline, but Malcolm Goodwin playing the young August was just absolutely phenomenal. I think that casting was absolutely perfect, and you can just really tell the heart of this show being this character being so obsessed with the Usher family, even kind of also staying back from his family to try to take down the Usher family in his own sort of greed and I guess search for revenge throughout this entire show. He really was the heart of it, and to see how he was truly screwed over in this past was really effective, and honestly really emotional to see this story finally be told to him in the end, and him say by the end of the series that it doesn't matter. The Usher family got what they deserved, and he can go home to his family and live his life as if none of it ever happened, and kind of move on from all this torture that he had essentially put upon himself after being so vengeful for so many years. But after screwing over Dupine in this show, Madeline and Roderick go over to the CEO of this pharmaceutical company, and after kind of garnering some sort of trust in the CEO, saying that he is a second-hand man, he should be trusted by everybody, they essentially go to the basement of their business, and they kind of knock him out, put him in this wall, put the bricks all together, and the Roderick kind of went down to this place throughout the entire season just staring at this wall, and the entire time you thought that he was staring at the ghosts of all his children, which he was still staring at the ghosts of all his children, but he was going down to that place for a reason, because that is where he committed his first murder, the first act of I guess cruelty, that he had put himself in this position to be at the top of this world. The greed had finally gotten to him to the fullest extent at this point when he committed his first murder, and this was the site where the body was still maintaining behind that wall. And it was just a very significant turn and a very unexpected turn for the show to take at that point, to see the cruelty in these characters to truly show that these people are as bad as they can possibly be, and as a way to get an alibi to not get caught for this murder, they go over to this bar where they run into Verna's character as this bartender. Verna essentially makes the deal that they will never get caught for this murder. They will never get caught for any of the bad things that they ever do for the rest of their lives, as long as Roderick Usher lives. And as soon as he dies, before his final moments, the rest of his family are going to go out with him. All his children, everybody else around him, they're all going to die one at a time until all of the entire Usher family is dead and gone. And that sadly did include Lenore, the innocent grandchild of the Usher family, and she did absolutely nothing wrong. She had the biggest heart of all of them. She was always making the right decisions. She was the one trying to save her mom out of desperation, and she did save her mom. She was able to get out of this family. She was able to make all the right decisions. She was so innocent from all of it, and it was very heartbreaking to see Verna go ahead and visit her in her bedroom to essentially tell her the future, that her mom was going to go to a bunch of doctors. She was going to get her skin back after 3 years. She was going to start a Lenore Foundation where they're going to kind of, I guess, donate all this money that they get from the collapse of the Usher Pharmaceuticals, like a fortune essentially, and she was going to get a lot of it, and that she was going to make this foundation that was going to help people of domestic abuse for years to come, and that she was the one who made that possible. And then she reaches over, touches her shoulder, and Lenore dies in that very moment. And that was absolutely heartbreaking. If anything, this show got me even close to tearing up. It was this moment. It was so tragic and heartbreaking, but she was facing the sins of the grandfather who made that deal, and everybody in this bloodline was destined to die no matter what. And at this point, we've pretty much reached the end of the series. The Usher house is literally starting to fall and collapse in on itself. Madeline comes out of the basement with her eyes torn out by Roderick in this very brutal way that he also confesses to doing this to her, and she goes and she strangles Roderick. The house collapses. Carl Lumley barely gets out of there alive, and he sees Verna as this crow on top of the fallen house fly away and visits their grave. And just, it's a very poetic ending for all of this. And really the only character that made it out very happily was, Ruth Codd's character, who also got a large portion of the fortune of the inheritance after the fall of the House of the Ushers. And also, of course, the wife of Henry Thomas's character. She, of course, eventually got her skin back and was able to create that foundation. And I do believe that all happened later on in the future of this series. And of course, August Dupine gets to go back to his family and just be done with this vengeance that he's been holding onto for all of these years. And something that I forgot to mention at the very beginning of this review was the fact that it's based on a short story from Edgar Allan Poe, and was also an adaptation of a bunch of different poetry by Edgar Allan Poe. And I think that this show, if it does anything perfectly, it just captures the vibe and the tone and the atmosphere of those poems. And if I were to describe this series in any single word, it would be poetic. I think that the ending of all these characters is very poetic. You get the poetic justice of the fall of the House of Usher. You get the poetic justice in terms of Carl Lumley's character going off and living happily ever after. You also get the poetic tragedy of Kyliegh Curran's character, dying in the end, but also leading to the saving of a bunch of people through this charity and this foundation made in her name. And so the ending, the final 3 episodes is so damn good. I just love the final, the way this show comes together by the end of it. Even if the first half of the season is kind of repetitive and you kind of get used to the structure of the show, I think it does make the most of that structure. I think the cast is phenomenal. I think by the end of it, it really is a very satisfying watch. But that is going to be the end of my very long-winded review for the fall of the House of Usher. I would definitely recommend this if for some reason you got through this entire spoiler review without actually going to watch the show. Go watch it if you haven't already. And if you did watch it, definitely comment down below what you loved about this series. And are you going to miss Mike Flanagan's yearly Netflix horror shows? I'm going to miss it so much, but he has gone off, I think, to Amazon Prime to make a Dark Tower series. And with him being easily the best person to adapt anything Stephen King, I'm sure it will be great. I will, of course, watch anything that Mike Flanagan ever puts his hands on, because I think all of them are very much worth watching and are very good. And of course, if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews in my 13 Days of Halloween series. I'm currently working on a deep dive video essay into the original Exorcist trilogy that I'll hopefully have up next Thursday. And of course, The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon is reaching its finale on Sunday, and I think I end up talking about that on the channel probably on Monday as well. So a lot of stuff to come on my 13 Days of Halloween series, and a lot of reviews of movies just in general, with everything coming out in the future dates. So definitely subscribe, like I said, leave a like, comment down below what you thought of the fall of the House of Usher, and I hope to see you all in my next one.